Greetings, Assalamu alaikum, welcome everyone to another episode of the Hikmah Project podcast. Today we'll be speaking to Salima Adelstein, who's a Murshida, a spiritual teacher on the path, and one of my spiritual teachers, so I'm very delighted to be doing a podcast with her. She is co-founder of the University of Sufism and academic dean for the spiritual ministry degree programs. She is founder and spiritual director of the Farm of Peace, a Sufi healing retreat center and community center, which is where I first met her during the retreat. And I'll post a link and more details of her bio in the podcast notes. She has been guiding students to the path to truth for over 25 years and was a student handpicked by Sidi Muhammad Jamal, the Grand Mufti of Al-Aqsa Mosque in Palestine. So has a absolutely amazing story to share with us. And the podcast itself is unedited, and I think that's because the whole conversation just flowed from a state of presence. And I've left the gaps in there which are as powerful, if not more, than what is spoken. But I hope you're able to tap into the transmission and the incredible love and generosity she emanates. So just a shout out to our new followers and subscribers. Thank you so much for supporting the Hikmah project. It makes a huge difference. If you find this podcast useful and appreciate the work of the Hikmah project, please do consider being a paid supporter. It makes all the difference. On that note, inshallah, we hope to be starting a reading circle as well with some zikr and make that a regular thing. So more details on that in due course. So without further ado, here's the podcast. So Salima, welcome to the Hikmah project podcast.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here with you today.
And I'm very delighted and humbled that you've joined and we finally managed to make this happen.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. So, for my listeners, I was wondering whether we can start just a bit about your background and whether, you were always a spiritual seeker and how you arrived at the path of Sufism.
Sure. I think I've always been a spiritual seeker. My parents used to talk about just how I was interested in things that normal children might not be interested in, how I was curious about the unseen world and the world of the angels. So I think I was born as a spiritual seeker. I spent most of my high school years really looking for a spiritual path when most people were at my age into drugs and other things. And I found my first spiritual path was actually with transcendental meditation. So I met and worked with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi for about 30 years. And although that path was wonderful, and I had probably the most beautiful experiences of unity consciousness and God consciousness, I always felt like there was something more and something that was missing. And I grew up Jewish. I used to love the Jewish holidays. We're actually in one of the Jewish holidays right now. And my parents didn't quite understand, but I would spend the whole day in temple just waiting to see kind of the white light when they opened up the case where the holy book was kept. And I missed that in TM. So, as life would have it, I was on a vacation in Egypt, studying some of the sacred sites in Egypt, and I heard the call to prayer while we were sort of perusing the Nile, and it spoke to my soul the way nothing I had ever heard did. It just was beautiful. And I felt my soul just saying, yes, this is it. And I didn't know quite what that meant, but shortly thereafter, I met my Sufi guide, Sidi Mohammed Al Jamal, who was from Palestine. And I was, I think I was in a workshop. I was giving a workshop on energetic healing, and I had just returned from India. I spent quite quite a few months studying with gurus and spiritual teachers and spiritual healers in India. And a friend of mine said, gee, there's a Sufi healer here in town in New Mexico where I was teaching. Would you like to meet them? And I said, sure, why not? But do I need to be a part of what he's doing? And they said, no, 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 there's no obligation. You're just going to talk to him to see who he's all about. So I walked into this courtyard, into this beautiful house in New Mexico. There were Buddhas and other statues. And I was like, that's kind of strange because what a little I know about Sufism and Islam, I wouldn't expect to see those kind of statues, but maybe it was just the owner of the house. So I was curious. And as I entered the house, this tall, very heavy set man gave with a jalaba, sort of these Arabic clothes, gave me a huge hug. And he said, my holy daughter, I am so happy to see you. My initial reaction was, oh, this must be the host of the house because sheikhs don't hug women. And I was used to being in India where gurus did a namaste. So I sat down for the teaching and quickly recognized the man who gave me that hug was, in fact, the Sufi master. So immediately, sort of everything that I would say I believed, everything that we now call pictures or images, just got shattered in that one moment. And I was brought into a reality of my spirit, my essence, through his teachings in a reading in Music of the Soul. And I watched him give an initiation, a Sufi promise to a Muslim woman right right after that. And at that time, my third eye was very open and I was very psychic and saw auras and things like that. And I saw this brilliant white light, like what I had seen in the temple when I was a child, coming from him, from his heart into the heart of this woman and surrounding him. And my being just said, I want what this man has. I want to carry that light. So he turned to me and he said, would you like to take the Sufi promise? Now you have to, your audience needs to understand one thing. I was brought up in Massachusetts and spent most of my life in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is a very intellectual city. And I processed everything through my mind, going through what are the pros, what are the cons, what am I getting into? I need to know everything before I decide anything. At that moment, none of that was true. My heart just leaped into his heart and joined together as I repeated these words that, to be honest with you, at that time, I didn't even remember what I said. It just felt like I'm coming home. This is where I've always meant to be. And then he gave me the name Salima. And Salima, he said, means the one whose heart rests in the deep peace of God. And a friend of mine who was with me at the time looked and said, that name really suits you. And I laughed because that wasn't my state at all. I was a rebel and an activist. And if there was any good cause, you could count on me to be right there fighting for it. So the idea of peace was a foreign concept in my heart. My heart knew freedom and justice and other things like that. And peace just wasn't part of the equation, probably because I also questioned, worried, and doubted a lot about life in general. So a year passed, and I met him again. And at that point, he invited me to come to Jerusalem and study with him and learn more about the Sufi way. I wasn't even sure the Sufi way was my path at that point. I had lots of questions. But when an opportunity like that presents itself, you listen to a yes inside of you. So at first I said, well, yes, and I've got some workshops and I've got to make some money, and I'll come in about 3 months. And he said a word. He said, Bismillah. I didn't at that time know what Bismillah meant, but I knew when he said it, I was missing an opportunity. So I said, okay, I'll come. When do you want me? This was on a Monday, I think. And he said that Thursday. And I was like, how am I going to make that work? How am I going to get a plane ticket? It's going to cost a fortune. You can imagine kind of all the musings that was going on in my heart and in my mind at that point. Well, this was back in the day. I'm going to age myself here, when we had travel agents. So I called my travel agent and I said, Sue, can you do anything? I know I'm supposed to be in Minnesota. I need to go to Jerusalem. Do you think you can switch my ticket around so I can go to Jerusalem and I'll cancel my engagement, my other engagement? And she said, I'll call you back. And this is when you have a sign. You know, Sufism talks about Allah gives us signs. Well, she called me back and it didn't cost any more than what my ticket was. Yeah, shocking, wasn't it? So I went off to Jerusalem and studied with him. My life was transformed in that experience. I found that peace in my heart. All the worry that I used to have, and I was a queen of warriors, left my body, disappeared. I still can't find it. So I was determined to begin to bring this to the West, begin to teach people and have people experience, and what we say in Sufism, taste what I experienced. So set up a spiritual retreat, a zawiya, for people to come in my little studio apartment at the time and learn what I learned in Jerusalem and find God and find peace in their heart and learn how to just transform those hurts and negativities and places in our heart that keeps us separate and really find unity. And that's how I got to where I am now, and very grateful. So thank you for asking.
Thank you. That's quite amazing. Before we carry on with the journey that you had, I just want to ask a bit more about Siddhi, particularly for my listeners who may not have encountered somebody of that spiritual caliber. And given you had already met various gurus and swamis and spiritual teachers and had experiences of higher states of consciousness, how was it then when you, given those experiences you've already had, how was it then when you met Siddhi? How did you know he was a real guide? And did you meet other Sufi teachers as well? And what was different about Siddhi?
It's a beautiful question. For me, what was different about Siddhi was the magnitude of light that he carried and the way that he was able to take exquisitely beautiful experiences of higher consciousness and bring them down into earth so that they just didn't become an experience that you had while meditating, but they became experiences that you had in your daily life and used in your daily life. He was a man of service, and he served the poor and cared for the poor, and a man of incredible knowledge of both the seen world and the unseen world. So being with him, it was like mysteries and secrets revealed themselves to you, which I had never experienced with any other master. When I met Sidi, I had no need to seek out other Sufi teachers. For me, he was complete and enough.
And so when you went to Jerusalem to study with him, could you tell us a bit more about what that looked like? What was your daily routine? How many sort of days were you there for? A week, for 40 days? And what sort of, how did he engage you? How did he teach you? What was his approach?
I was there for just about 40 days, maybe a little longer. He has, at that time, he now has a book out, or had a book out, that people can get called Music of the Soul. When I was with him, it wasn't yet published, so there were sheets of paper, and each day he had me write from his book, Music of the Soul, and there was a transmission from my pen, my hand, to my heart as I wrote these words. And he described it as he put in each word in this book, he covered it over 7 times with secrets and mysteries. So the more that you wrote his teaching, the more the layers and veils in your heart got uncovered. And sometimes that stirred up things, stirred up places of separation. It stirred up places of, oh my God, I'm Jewish. Here I am in an Arab household. Will they find out? Will I be killed? All of those fears got stirred up just through the process of this reading, writing, and remembering. And the remembrance was probably the most important tool, if you will, that he taught me of how to repeat the sacred name of God. And in Sufism, we use the name Allah, means the all and the nothing or the one, and how that brings you into that state of oneness, and how it clears the channels that separate you from yourself and from your true self. I met with him once a day. If he had anything to teach me, it was always done through experience. So he would give me different experiences to teach me what I needed to learn about myself. And then we would talk about it. If I didn't have any questions for him, a lot of it was question and answer, then he wouldn't spend too much time because he wanted me to find my true self. And the brilliance that he brought as a Sufi master was he kept on, how can I describe it? He kept on having me discover through different experiences that he gave me, discovering more and more either places of separation, places of doubt, those places of worry that I talked about, and what needed to be purified and cleaned in order to enter into those sacred states of unity. And he outlined 28 states, 28 what he calls stations. And in each of those 28 stations, he would first give me a taste of that station through a different activity or through a different exercise, whether it was a repetition of a divine name or through what we call a tauba exercise, where you're asking for forgiveness. And then take me through what he called the station of it, because there's a difference between a state and a station. And many of us in the spiritual world experience states of unity, glimpses, and it's a whole other experience to actually embody it and be in it. So, the example of the river going to the ocean and letting the river be absorbed into the ocean so that it no longer exists. And those were the kinds of opportunities that he presented in my time with him. He challenged me a lot, right? Challenged everything that I knew.
How would he challenge you? Would
Well,
it be
for example, I was, as I said, my third eye was very open and I was very psychic. And he would have me do a healing and take away my psychic sight. So everything that I depended on to know how to heal would be gone. And then he would teach me and show me what dependence on God is and how God heals. So it's through direct experiences like that, which is what we now teach at our university, because he was instrumental and was actually pretty insistent that we set up a university that's very unique, that teaches the kinds of things that he taught me when I was studying with him. And we're very fortunate now because he has about 30 books that he published that students can now study from. That answer your question?
beautiful? Thank you. I now want to turn to the journey of Sufism, and for listeners especially, I know some have been journeying on the path for many years, and others are wondering what the path is and may have encountered through YouTube and other platforms teachings such as New Age spirituality, Buddhism, Zen Buddhism. Um, there's so much available nowadays. And so, my apologies in advance if these questions seem very basic, but often seekers come with some of the most basic questions, but they can turn out to be the most profound as well.
Absolutely. No apology needed. It's fine.
So, the first point is, if one is learning to be present through mindfulness, breath, mindfulness practice, which is a word that is used in corporate organizations nowadays, that mindfulness practice and controlling your stress and, regulating your emotions. From that position of being present and aware, how does one understand God? Who or what is God? And how do we know him or her?
The Sufi path is the path of love, first and foremost. We have a creator, whatever name you want to put on the creator, whether it's God, whether it's Elohim, whether it's Allah, whether it's Mother, Father, God. The connection to our being That drop of light from our Creator is inside of us. When we find that light inside of us, it's an automatic connection to the light of the One. And that One is God. And there's nothing like God. God gives us signs in creation to know Him. And I say Him because God isn't a him or a her. That is beyond our pronouns, right? But it's love that's God's signature on creation. And the more that we experience love in creation, the more we learn to love each other as brothers and sisters, the more we see the awe of Allah's creation in nature, the more we listen with our deep ear to hear every living being praising their Creator, the more we get a glimpse of understanding God. There's a beautiful surah in the Quran where God describes Himself, called Surah Ikhlas. Right? You probably know it. God describes Himself as one. Hu Allahu Ahad, Allahu Samad, Lam Yalid wa Lam Yulad, wa Lam Yakun Lahu Kufuwan Ahad. I invite your listeners to take the vibration of that into their heart. And that will help them understand. The beauty of Sufism for me is that it is heart-based first, and then the mind comes in, so that the mind is in surrender to the heart's knowledge. And for most of us that are intellectually are born with strong intellects and strong minds, that journey from our mind to our heart sometimes is not the easiest of journeys. But it's probably the most important journey that we do in our life because it's what brings us ultimate happiness and joy. We say in the Sufi way that God is a hidden treasure that desired to be known. So He placed Himself in the hearts of His beloved. We are the beloveds of God. And it's that journey of Sufism that is so precious, so divine.
Beautiful, thank you. You mentioned how you grew up in a Jewish household, but then obviously went to India and explored transcendental meditation, and then found yourself with Siddhi studying Sufism, who, for my listeners, may know that he was also the Grand Mufti, so who's an expert in in law as well. And could you say something about the role of religion, as in the outer forms, is that necessary in practicing Sufism in this part of the heart? And what purpose does it have?
So I'll give you an analogy of a tree. The tree has a bark that protects the sap, the life-giving force of the tree. The what you call religious practices, I would call them spiritual practices, are like the bark of that tree. They protect us in our daily life. We go through so many stresses in our daily lives, so many forces of good, and so many forces, unfortunately, of evil that exists in the world. Whether it's Judaism, Catholicism, Buddhism, Hinduism, I was recently in Japan, and Shintoism, if they don't become dogmatic, they provide an opportunity and a structure that gives us a layer of protection against some of the harshness in the world. For example, in Sufism, we pray 5 times a day at specific times during the day. If I hold it rigid, I need to pray, I lose all the mystical meaning of why I am praying. I'm praying to have a conversation with my Lord. I'm praying to have my light body washed by the angels from all of whatever might be picking up being in the world. I'm praying to remember who I am and what my purpose here is. Because as human beings, we forget. So it sets me in balance. It realigns you so that your connection is strong. So that you can stay connected to what is never changing in all that is changing around us.
Beautiful. And you mentioned earlier about the 28 stations Siddhi taught. And again, on behalf of my listeners here who may be aware of the transformation of the ego through, for example, the works of Jung, who's looked at areas such as the shadow, and then there's the heart, and I guess on a deeper level, the soul, as you mentioned earlier, when you heard the call of prayer. But just from an outsider's perspective, somebody who isn't on the path yet and sees the heaviness of the world and some of the baggage they've carried, either through their conditioning of growing up and experiences in the world, or even ones which they've inherited through their lineage,
Mhm.
ancestral lineage. And so they are aware of this inner work, but aren't quite clear about how to go about transforming this and working with it. Could you say something around, a bit more around the path of Sufism as taught by Sidi and that journey of the 28 stations? How does the nafs or the ego get addressed? How does the shadow in Jungian terms get addressed? How is the heart addressed, and how is the deeper aspects of the soul? I'm sure some listeners are aware of levels of the soul mentioned in the Quran. The soul that commands to evil to the one that's at peace and is called um, by the divine. So how did that whole spectrum of the nafs, heart, and in the soul, how does that align with those 28 stations?
The 28 stations are a roadmap. So, for example, if you were trying to climb Mount Everest, there are many different ways to climb Mount Everest. Some are dangerous, and some are well trodden. And you would take a guide to help you climb so that you could stay safe and know the way. The 28 stations, as Sidi pulled them out, gives you the guide as well as our Sufi teachers to look at how do I complete myself in this lifetime? How do I arrive at what we call the hakika? How do we arrive at the truth of the true essence of us? So there's a journey that we call the journey to God, where our ego has to learn, just like a 2-year-old, right? Those of you out there that have children, you know, your 2-year-old can sometimes want what they want when they want it, and sometimes will have a tantrum around it if they don't get it, right? Our ego sometimes can be just like that. So the first area that we look at is, as you said, that first station of what is it listening to? Is it listening to the voice of God? Is it listening to some outside voice that you may have heard from your parents? You're no good, you're not good enough, right? You should do this, you shouldn't do that, from some religion that you went to, right? Or is it listening to, I want that big Mercedes or that Porsche I just saw, right? That it's desires. And part of the purification process that happens through the stations is the purification of those desires of our nafs, of our ego, those ways that we may listen to something that may not be the best for us. I love chocolate chip cookies, but if I eat way too many, they're not good for me, right? So we learn, how do we put things in balance? We learn to look at what are in Sufism we call, what are the veils? They're like curtains. They keep things covered so that we unveil the defenses that we've built up through different hurts, different experiences that we've had, different ways that we think, I'm protecting myself, rather than understanding how God protects us. And all of that is done through the first walking, what we call the first level of understanding these stations of the naps. And it's a tricky walking, which is why having a guide is a good thing. And I say it's tricky because one of the things that I learned that probably was a little shocking for my system is there's something called illusory light. Looks like light, acts like light, but on a deeper level really isn't light. And to be able to discern, just as you discern those voices, to be able to discern the light so that you don't get caught in fantasies or illusions is an important part of that first journey, that first walking through what we call the nafs, or our ego, or sometimes our personalities. So it gets beautified. We sometimes say that, the heart is like a mirror and it gets rusted through different experiences. I don't know about you, but when I was a child, we used to go to this country, this fair, and there were these fun mirrors in the fair. You ever been to those
Mm.
mirrors, right? So, I was always little, for those of you that don't know me, stature-wise. So I used to love the mirror that when you looked into it, made you really tall. That was my favorite mirror, but it was an illusion, right? I was still a little kid. Or the one that, made you really skinny or really fat, depending on your situation. You could like any of those. Well, our heart is similar in that it can give us perceptions that aren't the truth. And part of this journey through the nafs and through the heart and even through the soul is the purification of those perceptions, those beliefs that keep us from knowing ourselves and knowing the truth. And then there's the journey from to God, and then there's what we call the journey in God. And this is in Sufism what's known as the fana and the baka, the annihilation. And I don't exactly like that word annihilation because it has lots of pictures and lots of images with it, but it's the absorption into the one. I described it as a hug of love so strong that there's nothing left of you, only love. And then the next journey is the baka, sustaining that in the world and carrying God's message of peace, love, mercy, justice, and freedom here in the world, which, as you all know, are desperately needed right now. And that's a
Beautiful.
very simplified explanation for those of you that don't know anything about Sufism. The stations are divided into sets of seven. So we have what's called seven stations of the nap, seven stations of the heart, seven stations of the soul, and seven stations of the secret. And our university, the University of Sufism, is your journey through all of those stations, through each of the four levels that we offer.
Beautiful. I've got some questions lined up about the university, which I will, inshallah, come to. Um, one thing I'd like to do is just clarify some terms
Sure.
that you've used and our city has used. So one is love. And somebody, I think there's a quote, or somebody once said, if people knew the type of love Rumi is talking about, they wouldn't read him. And so by love, do you mean the love we see, for example, in the movie Titanic with Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, that romantic love, or is this a different type of love? And divine love, that's another term that's used, or and is what's the role of romantic love within the context of divine love?
Mhm. So our human love is a very conditional love, right? If you do something that I like and you treat me right, I love you. If you do something that I don't like, I'm going to withdraw my love from you. Okay? We've all experienced sets of that either in a partnership or oftentimes growing up with our parents. It's not the kind of love that we're talking about here. We're talking about an unconditional love. You were born from love. Your essence is love, and you will return to love. I had a client once, a patient who had ALS. And as you know, it's a very debilitating disease. And one of his last words to his family were, I just want you all to know all there is love. All there is love. If everyone on the planet understood that in the deepest way, we would have world peace. This is what Sufism brings to the world. It brings a roadmap of how to create not only peace within yourself, but global peace in the world. Because we have a war going on inside of us, whether we realize it or not. And that war gets manifested on the outside in many different ways. I'm not quite sure I answered your question, but
No, beautiful. Yes. The other terms are walking. I know that's used often, and also pictures, which you alluded to earlier. Could you maybe just explain what those terms mean?
sure. Walking is an interesting term because when you think about walking, or when you're actually walking, you're moving from one place to another. Right? Well, in Sufism, that's what's happening. You're moving from one place to another. You're moving from where you are, wherever that happens to be, into proximity with the Most High. You're moving from your ego-based nature, from your forgetful nature, into your more divine nature. So we call it a process of walking because there are actually steps. Just like in walking, you take steps. There are actually steps that lead you there. And that's my best definition I can give you of walking. The other one you asked about was
Pictures or veils.
pictures. So, did you ever watch a movie? You have a picture on a screen, and that picture may stay with you, right? Especially if it's an emotional movie. It kind of stays as an image in your heart. It stays as a way of relating to something that you may have seen. And those pictures that you watch could be violent, could be loving, could be funny, but they all stay as impressions in the heart. Right? I was just in Hiroshima at a peace conference, and they have a museum of what happened during the World War II when the United States put the atomic bomb onto Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And many people could not see those images because they were so graphic. They were, right? Well, whether we see those images on a screen outside or on a picture photograph, we have those same pictures or images within our heart. Some are positive and bring us joy, and some bring us sadness, and some actually work to, I'll say a strong word, but they work to destroy us, right? They don't work in our best interest. So part of when I say pictures, I'm talking about is how do we take those images, and just like when we turn off the television, for those of us that had old TVs, and there's kind of a white screen that eventually happens after the picture disappears. How do we do that so that the picture starts to disappear and there's that pure, clean, beautiful white light that radiates from your heart, that brings light to the world?
And so that's very interesting. So pictures can, am I right in saying pictures can not just be our experiences, which are imprinted on our hearts, but also our beliefs and ideas about ourselves
Absolutely.
and about other things, whether it's somebody's religion or
Mhm.
projections we may have of other people.
I had,
And
mhm.
mhm.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
and
Yeah.
and so maybe this is a point for the more experienced people on the path, is I think it's very easy to develop a picture of oneself as being more spiritual than somebody else
Hmm.
and have subtle forms of what you may call spiritual pride.
Hmm.
Again, I emphasize it's subtle, so it's so subtle sometimes a person on the path isn't even aware of it, which may be what you alluded to earlier when Siddhi was bringing out different parts, was showing you different aspects of yourself and triggers and through the writing. But for somebody, say, walking and they have this image of themselves, would that be a picture? And is it a question of detaching oneself, not having attachments to the pictures?
It's more than detachment. It's really about purification and beautification.
Mm,
So, for example, in my own life, as we've noted that I grew up in the Jewish tradition, I had a picture in my heart that all Arabs were my enemy.
mm,
They weren't to be trusted. I was to be afraid of them. And I needed to stay clear of them or they would kill me. That was the picture I was holding in my heart when I arrived in Jerusalem. Right? I was in enemy territory. I was scared. If I kept that picture in my heart, what would have happened? How would I have been with Sidi and his family and everybody else that I met in Palestine? I would have been on guard, right? I would have been defensive. by purifying that, by bringing the pure light of truth to it, I thought they're no different than I am. Their family life was just like my family life. They have the same issues and problems and joys and birthday celebrations. It's that kind of picture that gets eventually us to stop loving. You asked about the relationship between personal love and divine love. It's those kinds of pictures that keep us from stop loving each other and being skeptical and suspicious of each other, which doesn't allow us to be at one with each other, doesn't allow us to be a spiritual family together as brothers and sisters.
Beautiful. Can you tell us about the chandelier path and Siddhi? What is the chandelier path? What are the core characteristics of that path? I believe that's the one Siddhi taught. And I know there's others from the whirling dervishes and,
Mhm.
various other paths. But what's the core characteristics or the distinction of the chandelier?
The Shadaliya was founded by Hassan Shadali. And for me, what's unique about it is it's Allah and only Allah. So I've never been on any other Sufi path, so I can't really speak about it. But I do have a friend who was on another Sufi path, and they went through a different orientation in looking at kind of all the 99 names and working through the 99 names before they even got introduced to Allah, to the One. Shadaliya was a very not, I talked about spiritual pride. Shadaliya was a very intellectual, he was a spiritual seeker. He traveled all over looking for what he called the pole of his time, the perfect master. And for each master he went to, he asked, "Are you it?" And they would send him to somebody else. And he studied with all of them. So he had a wealth of knowledge about life, about spirituality, about himself. And then he was told, I love this story, that the master he was looking for lived right in the same town that he lived in. That reminds me of the story of Wizard of Oz, right? When Dorothy went to Oz and she clicked her heels to get home, right? So when he got back, there was a mountain, it's called the Rift Mountains, and he traveled up the mountain to meet his master. His name was Mashish. And Mashish said to him, "Go back down the mountain and do wudu." Wudu is a ritual washing that we do that purifies our hands so that our hands are the hands of God. We use our hands in service, etc., through all these different parts of the body. So Shadaliya did that. He figured maybe he got dirty going up the mountain or whatever it was and went back down the mountain. When I first heard the story, I figured the mountain was a hill. I actually visited Mashish's tomb in the Rift Mountains, and it's quite a large mountain. So it wasn't an easy journey to go up and down this mountain. He did this 3 times. I'll keep the story short. And the third time, he realized, oh, his master wasn't talking about the ritual washing. He was talking about washing his heart, emptying his heart of all that he knew so that his guide could fill it. We say if you bring a thimble, a guide will fill a thimbleful. If you bring a bucket, the guide will fill a bucket. So it's the Shadowly is about the emptying of our heart so that the divine can fill it with the divine wisdom and the divine love.
Beautiful. Can you say something around when we speak about a path, in my humble understanding, this isn't just as it, or my experience has been, this isn't just a ritual of initiation or a set of teachings, but there is a vertical element of a transmission which comes through normally through the teacher. And I would just like to maybe add for our listeners, in my seeking, I had met a number of Sufi teachers and paths. And I decided to go to the Farm of Peace just because I wanted some time out and not knowing what I would experience. And it was the first retreat in which I didn't have a physical manifestation of a guide in the form of Siddhi, say, but I felt the transmission just got stronger and stronger by the day to the point where it felt like I'd arrived home. And this was not a mental conclusion. There was no, it wasn't a rational sort of comprehension. It was very overwhelming. And it was, I think, at the end of it, just a complete state of surrender and gratitude and mystery. It was just very mysterious. It was as though I was in the presence of a very powerful um, spiritual pole or guide. I don't know how to explain that. I mean, we had two lovely people holding the circle for us, and Salima would visit during the day. But there was some work going on in the unseen, which was very deeply transformative and nourishing and very mysterious. But part of me feels there was a transmission of grace of what we call this path. Is that right, Salima? Could you say something about the when one takes a bayah or a connection with a real master, the transformative grace which cooks and ferments one's consciousness?
Yeah, you described it far better than I can. That was beautiful. What I um, simulated what I experienced in Jerusalem at the Farm of Peace. So you were getting what we call in Sufism a taste of what it's like to walk the Sufi path. And when you taste, you want more. And transmission is a big part of the path. And it's sort of a heart-to-heart transmission that does require a level of trust and safety and surrender, and ultimately what we call submission, which is just a deeper level of surrender, where your heart goes into a prostration, your heart goes into a deep bow. And that was the gratitude that you experienced, that gratitude is a natural outcome of that prostration.
I believe that's where you gave me the name Suleiman.
Mhm.
It's my Sufi name. And you also said to me to read the Quran within.
Mhm.
For our listeners, could you say something about what that means, the Quran within, and reading it?
It's a very deep subject, but we have a book inside of our heart. As you mentioned, mysteries. We have many mysteries and secrets. The outer Quran is often described as a shy bride. So you enter in the outer Quran from that place of being with a shy bride. And oftentimes, when people read the Quran for the first time, it doesn't feel like love. It doesn't feel like a love letter from God. It feels sometimes like a do and a don't, right? It sometimes can feel harsh as it's warning you about something. By looking in and finding and uncovering the book that lives inside of you, it gives you the portal. For those of you that understand energy, it gives you the portal to enter into the deeper meanings, into the secrets of the Quran, into opening that outer book and reading it as a love letter from your God, into feeling the light that's transmitted from the chapters in that holy book. Just like I described the Torah when I was a child and seeing that white light coming out and coming into my heart. It's the same with the Quran, because that white light is inside of you. And as you begin to uncover it and experience it, and what we call taste it in Sufism, then you're reading the book of your life. And everything starts to make sense. I describe it sometimes like a tapestry. And a tapestry has all these different colored threads. And if you look at one thread, you have no idea what the tapestry really is all about. But when all those threads are put together, it's a beautiful tapestry, right? It has many different colors and it's sort of vibrant in its essence. Our life is like that too. Every experience that we have is part of what's written in this book. It helps make sense out of our life and helps us understand our purpose for being here. Part of those secrets that we talk about when we talk about uncovering the treasures that God placed inside of our hearts when He created us.
Cool. You mentioned earlier the journey from the head to the heart. And I know that in some Sufi circles, there's the idea of doing away with books
Mhm.
because it's a path of taste, as it is, say, in Zen Buddhism or mindfulness practice about getting out of your head and being present in your body and being present with your breath and in the now.
Mhm.
But interestingly, you mentioned how Sidi wrote a
Mhm.
number of books and then also got, as a spiritual practice, students to write those books out. But it sounds like it was more than just a transmission of concepts which one reads, um, but was a transmission. It wasn't like it was in a foreign language. He didn't get people to write out, say, something in Arabic, which they may not understand. There were ideas there that were being conveyed, but there was obviously something deeper that addressed the yearning in the heart.
Mhm.
So, what then is the role of the mind on the path? Because it sounds like Siddhi never divorced it from the journey of the heart, but it became synthesized or an integral part of the awakened heart.
When we start, generally we describe the mind as a black mind because it really doesn't understand and by its nature cannot understand. Because the nature of the mind, by its nature, brings separation, which is not a bad thing. It allows me to know you're a man and I'm a woman. You wear a blue shirt and I'm wearing a pink shirt, for example, right? That it has its function, but it doesn't bring unity. It helps us discern, but it doesn't know or how to bring unity to itself. It's like a computer in a binary state. So by exploring what Allah placed inside of our hearts, by exploring what we call the marifa or the wisdom of the heart, the mind will surrender or bow to that heart's knowledge. And in that heart's knowledge, the mind, we say, becomes a white mind, an illuminated mind, which in Hinduism is the enlightened mind. And it's through that process that the two become one. And true unity becomes a natural state of being where the seen and the unseen become available to us, where we realize what's real and what's not, what's truth. I've always been a seeker of truth. What's truth? So that our being stands in that truth and holds that truth and walks in that life in that truth. And then the mind and the heart are in harmony together, rather than in most, not all, but most people, there's a natural fight going on between what the heart wants and what the mind wants.
Thank you. Just coming onto the university now, I'd just like to ask you to maybe share some of your experiences of how Siddhi taught Sufi or spiritual healing. I know not many paths, Sufi paths, even delve into that. And I know some of my listeners would have had some experience or taste of forms of healing, such as Reiki, which is quite popular. And so, what was this Sufi healing that Siddhi taught, and how did it work? And how is it now taught at the university?
Yeah, we say that the walking, the Sufi walking and the healing go hand in hand. That the more that you walk and the deeper that you walk, the stronger your healing abilities are. It starts with this connection to the Most High, to God, that I talked about in the beginning. And that's the first part of the healing, to recognize who is the healer and to empty yourself so that you become a vessel for that healing of God's light. It starts with a prayer, asking God to help you become his hands. To help, he is the healer. He, remember, is not he or she. So the first piece is the connection to God and the prayer to be God's servant in this world. So we're not fixing anybody. They're already whole. We're just helping them uncover, to recognize their wholeness, to recognize the parts that may be out of balance or that are dis-ease, out of ease, and need to return to wholeness. So we look at those pictures that I talked about earlier and see what's at the root. What's at the deepest level of those pictures, those images, those illusions or beliefs that we're holding that aren't serving us. And we may use different Sufi practices to help clear and empty and touch into those places. It's like when you bring the light to the darkness. And then we look at what is the teaching involved? How does this get resolved so that we understand what it is that we're being taught about whatever the disease might be or whatever we feel needs to be healed? The Quran, as in many holy books, has a vibration in its transmission. So many of your readers and listeners, I'm sure, know about sound vibration. and what it's like to sort of raise the vibration of your DNA and raise the vibration in your body. So by reciting these Quranic ayats and prayers and divine names, we're actually raising the vibration. Some of you may know the water studies that were done and the crystalline structures that were formed and how beautiful they are. But one of those was Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the most merciful, most compassionate. Imagine our bodies are made out of what percent water? When we recite that, it's creating those crystalline structures that are beautiful. So the next part of the healing is that beautification process that allows the light to transform so that our heart expands and we're able to find ourselves, our truth, and our beauty. There's a favorite expression I like to use in teaching a lot. I'm sure you've heard me say it. When God created you, God created beauty. Can all of us really stand in that truth? Or what voices come up? What images come up when we even say it? Part of the healing is purifying those. It's like cleaning those. They're like stains upon our heart, upon that mirror. And each progressive level, of the healing university, of our Sufi university, takes you deeper and deeper into those levels of healing and those levels of walking. We also do, some of you may know, some of the prophetic medicine with herbs, with cupping. So we also teach those at the university and different what we call ruqyas, which are different remedies that will help with specific things like anxiety, which is very prevalent with our children today. So that gives you a little understanding, I hope, of some of the spiritual healing that's done at our university. Our CD had formed the university and told us that this university is unique. It is the only one like it in the world. And we're hoping that not only will it be one, but someday we'll have campuses all over the world to make it easy for everybody to come. Right now, it's primarily a virtual university because of COVID, but inshallah, God willing, we'll be back together someday and have a hybrid system so that it has access for everybody.
Could you say a bit more about Siddhi's role in establishing the university? How much guidance did he give, and in terms of writing the curriculum? And
I'm laughing because our faculty wrote the curriculum and planned the curriculum based on the teachings that we received from him. And then he reviewed everything. And I mean everything. He reviewed every course, he reviewed every handout, he tested all the faculty on their own healing skills to make sure that their healings were good enough to teach others. Imagine being tested like that by your guide. And that's why I'm laughing. And so he very much had a major influence in the development of all aspects of the university, including the faculty. He approved all the faculty when we first started.
wow, you mentioned this term rukia, and I know in um, traditional Muslim circles that's seen as a form of protection of prayers of protection. And I know on the spiritual path, I'm aware of two paths that have it almost an integral part of their daily practices. One is in the Naqshbandi, they have the 33 verses, which I believe was compiled by Shah Waliullah, the 33 verses of the Quran to help as seekers travel through the unseen. And the other one that I'm aware of is Ibn Arabi, is his the Hizb of Ibn Arabi, which again is recited by people on the Akbarian way. Did Sidi offer something? Did the Shadiliya path offer something similar in terms of protection on the seen, unseen sort of levels for people studying, journeying towards God? And if so, what's the reason? Why does a seeker need that level
Mhm.
of spiritual protection?
Sure. Um, yes, CD did offer many what he called, and we still offer them today, what we call protection promises, as well as different ayats, different lines from the Quran, as well as after prayer practice that he's given us. So there are many different kinds of spiritual tools that he's given us for protection. The best way that I can answer why is to give you an analogy or an example. When you're out in the sun and there's a lot of light, you can see your shadow. And when there's more light, your shadow is even bigger. We don't want those shadow influences in our life. So the protection promises and the protection allows us to be free from those shadow influences so that we can, as I said earlier, just stand in the truth and stand in the true light as the prophet Abraham, for those of you that know the prophet Abraham, stood and said, there is only one.
Beautiful. Just final question, if I may. You mentioned the analogy of climbing the Himalayas and having
Mhm,
many paths. And I've often heard it say that the spiritual path isn't a straight or linear path, it's almost cyclical,
mhm,
where you would go round in circles, what may seem like going round in circles, but you're ascending.
mhm,
Maybe it's what T.S. Eliot said when he said, you know, we never cease from exploring only to arrive at where we began and to know it for the very first time.
mhm.
I'm just paraphrasing that. But so to if that's true, to extend that analogy, would it mean somebody who is awakened or enlightened may still have the temptation of the caramel chocolate, which is what the nafs initially started with, but now there's a completely different perspective, or does the desire for the caramel chocolate completely wiped away in those higher stations?
I would pray not. For those of you that love chocolate, our guide certainly loved chocolate, and used to talk about it representing the sweetness of life. The difference is you're you're now going to know what's good for you and what's not. So through that connection, you're going to balance your life to know, oh, I really don't need that piece of chocolate right now. What I need is a healthy meal. Then after the healthy meal, I may want that sweet of a chocolate, but I'm not going to let it substitute for giving my body the nutrition that it needs. Because part of the promise that we've made in pre-eternity, and I'm going to open up a new subject, sorry about that, is that we've promised to take care of this body that we've been given in this life. We've promised to take care of our heart. We've promised to take care of our soul and our spirit before we start taking care of others. And I've seen too many great spiritual people, helpers, healers, just good people in the world, not taking care of themselves. And that would be the difference, is you're taking care of yourself so that you can care for others.
Sorry, just one more question has come up.
It's okay.
What's the role of the spiritual family, the beloveds, as is used in the path, on the fellow travelers? How important are they, or can one travel the Sufi path with the guidance of a teacher by themselves?
We can travel many different ways. The beauty of community is twofold. Number one, they will be a mirror for you. And number two, you have good company on the path. So you have companions that help support you on the path. And that's the other reason why, at least on the Sufi way, we're encouraged to have marriage partners. Because it's through, yes, we can go to God alone without a partner. But there's also a very special journey that happens in marriage when you go through another person's heart to reach God, to reach your completion.
Speaking of marriage and the Sufi path, I know marriage is regarded as a sunnah, and one, in a way, can't really talk about Sufism without having mentioned the Prophet, peace be upon him, and by extension, the Mohammedan light, the Hakika Muhammadiyah.
Mm-hmm.
How central is the prophetic character and his light in the Sufi path, and how did Sidi understand and transmit that?
Sidi embodied it and then helped us embody it. So not only is it central, it's it's the whole, it's the essence of the path. The Prophet ﷺ was the completion of the prophetic message. And as we talk about our completion in this life, the Prophet is a perfect example for us of how he lived his life in his trials and tribulations, in his successes and failures, and in the mercy that he carried for all the worlds, not just Muslims, but all humans, all animals, all minerals, all plants, all species. May we all carry that mercy.
On that note, Salima, thank you ever so much for joining us today, and I know countless listeners, both in this time and some other time, would have drank from your wisdom and received your beautiful transmission. And inshallah, I look forward to welcoming you, inshallah, on another podcast in the future.
Inshallah, thank you again. The work that you're doing is holy. May Allah bless you and continue to give you success. Salam.